Out to our great friend Greg Pruett joining us from the Idaho Second Amendment Alliance, the Idaho Dispatch, the Pruett Hiking Adventures. He's got a lot of platforms. He's got a lot of things to say. Good morning, sir.
Hey, good morning, Kevin. Hearing that traffic report, the heavy and steady traffic, that is one thing about the Treasure Valley I do not miss. But how are you,
It,
sir?
it, I'm fixated and fascinated by where you live right now because is it more or less Idaho than where you used to live? Right down the road from all of us in Middleton.
You, you know, in terms of politics, maybe less Idaho, but in terms of how it feels, I live in a small town called Rigby out in the country. I don't actually live in the town. And there's chickens and livestock everywhere. So it definitely has a more Idaho feel than where I was living at in Caldwell. So whatever that means.
I know. Caldwell, Middleton, you did the tour of the Treasure Valley, but it is fascinating. Now, again, how our politics in eastern Idaho different from out here with the heavy and steady traffic?
Well, it's definitely a much more moderate area in southeast Idaho across the board. I mean, we get some good conservatives in here and there, but by and large, it's a more moderate area. Unfortunately, I mean, Mike Simpson's been reelected over and over and over again, and I would consider him a pretty moderate lawmaker or congressman, to say the least. So definitely more moderate than where I was.
I would agree with you on that, but I mean, I think he's been there since the late '80s, early '90s, as far as a member of
Yeah,
Congress.
it might have been right after I was born, and I'm almost 44, so who knows?
My my man. All right, let's get to a lot of this. Let's start with your role in the Idaho Second Amendment Alliance. Some controversy in Caldwell.
Yeah, that's an ongoing theme. It's kind of a wild town that I no longer live in, but yeah, the rodeo, certainly the Caldwell Night Rodeo. There's been a lot of controversy and backlash over several things. Honestly, the gun-free zone that they have implemented for their events this week, and then also the sheriff and I would say the police, or maybe the city officials, the city government, and security fees. So there's two different stories there that have caused some controversy this week in Caldwell, which is an ongoing weekly theme, it seems like.
Well, we'll start with that. By the way, Congressman Simpson, for those keeping score at home, was elected in 1999. My mistake saying '89. That's probably was when he was in the Idaho House. However, let's
Yeah.
get to the first one. Obviously, the big one involving the Second Amendment, the gun-free zones at this rodeo. Now, again, me being the liberal in our relationship, aren't there a lot of gun-free zones at all rodeos? And why is this year controversial in Caldwell, sir?
No, not necessarily. I mean, a lot of the more remote rodeos do not have do not have this problem. They don't implement a gun free zone at a lot of the more local rodeos. We have a rodeo down here, and it doesn't. They don't do any type of. They have security, but there's no wanding at the gate or metal detectors or anything like that at the entrances. So the Caldwell Night Rodeo is a bigger rodeo, and they decided that firearms were not going to be allowed. And this has honestly, Kevin, been a big wake up call because of the 2023 Idaho Supreme Court opinion that we were a part of, right, with Scott Herndon and the Second Amendment Foundation, where they said that if a private organization wants to ban guns on public property, they're going to go ahead and allow them to do that, even though the city itself that owns the property, they're not allowed to do that. The city can't implement a gun-free zone, but somehow they can convey that power to a private entity on public property. And to this day, we're still, and gun owners across the country, the lawyers that have looked at this have said this doesn't make sense. If the city doesn't have the power, how can they give that power to someone else? for temporary leasing a public venue or whatever. To us, if you're going to use public property, you should have to recognize the right to keep and bear arms, all rights, all constitutional rights that come with that. So that was the Iowa Supreme, and now people are kind of going, hey, how can they? I mean, I couldn't tell you how many questions I got on just that. How are they allowed to do this on public property? And I'm like, okay, that thing that happened back in 2023, Kevin, this is the result of that.
Yeah, I wondered the whole thing because again, that wasn't an easy haul for you guys, was it? I mean, people that have moved here, with all due respect, in the last 5 or even 6 or 7 years, they don't recall it was you and Seth and others that started this grassroots organization that, again, I've called it the most successful grassroots organization in the state that actually had legislation. Now, I mean, you were called a terrorist. You had people showing up expressing their First and Second Amendment rights at the State House. You were called a lot of names, and the big money was not in your back pocket. It was all lined up against you, and you didn't have a lot of folks that were as conservative as they are today, sir.
Yeah, it's been a long haul from 2012. We're coming up on 13 total years of doing this, and like you said, it's been a long haul. We've been called just about everything you can imagine. We've been through a lot, Kevin. But at the end of the day, that money aside, we just said, look, we're going to start a grassroots group rather than focusing on big money and that kind of stuff, and we'll get the gun owners involved. That was really our goal. We have to get the gun owners involved. It doesn't matter, Kevin, if I have $5 million as an organization and it's just me running around trying to do stuff, right? I'm just one person. Nobody cares. But when you get the gun owners involved and they're mobilized and they're doing phone calls and emails and marches and all that kind of stuff, it wakes these lawmakers up. It makes a huge difference when people get involved and they start voicing their opinion.
Well, and what did you learn from that?
That's how stuff moved. For the first couple of years when we were pushing constitutional carry, which was our organization's initial effort, because nobody else was doing it, it was just me going down to the Capitol. I mean, I was literally talking to every single lawmaker I could in the Capitol, and it was just me by myself. And then when we mobilized people really hard in 2015, and then in 2016, when the first section of constitutional carry got passed, you remember this, Kevin, and we were doing massive marches and rallies, emails and phone calls, and ultimately it got passed. And so the gun owners, I hope you guys know, you really do make a huge difference.
Well, you do. And again, I can remember back at Thomas Hammer, where it was Steve Ackerman, Tea Party Bob, and we had the NRA guy who's probably in some other state now. And just because somebody said they were from the NRA didn't necessarily mean they had the best interest of Idaho gun owners. And you always brought that up as well.
Yeah. You're talking about Dakota. I don't know where he is now. And he was probably the worst NRA rep that we ever had in terms of when I started doing this. But setting that aside, yeah, the NRA they were killing constitutional carry for years. They were coming in and telling lawmakers not to push it, and that was extremely frustrating and very eye-opening for us. And the new gal's not like that. She actually lives here, and I think is a better rep for them. But it was they would go behind the scenes. I mean, the first. Probably remember this, Kevin, but a lot of people don't know there was a constitutional carry bill in 2016 right before the one that actually passed, and we had to kill it because it had gun control in it. And we were like, well, what are we doing? We're not going backwards. Why are we taking gun rights away from people in hopes that in the future we can get that back? That's stupid in a state like that. Like, what are you doing? So we killed that bill. And then ultimately, Senate Bill 1389 is the one that passed. So that fight with the NRA for so many years was extremely frustrating for Idaho's gun owners.
It was. Let's talk about the Castle Doctrine. That is the white whale that continues to elude us.
Yeah, it's more of, I guess you could say castle doctrine and stand your ground. We want to avoid political prosecutions here in Idaho, and we have a good example with a good man named Theron who was just exonerated in court in Ada County back in March of this year. Ended up pulling a gun in defense of his family and himself, and rather than going after the crazy guy who was running around at a bus stop trying to, scaring people and making threats and all this other kind of stuff. Rather than charging him with a crime, they took the gun owner, who was a veteran, no criminal history, just an overall good family man, and ran him down for $30,000 in court fees by the time he was done. And we can't have that kind of stuff. There was no evidence that this guy did anything wrong. And that's the type of stuff. And this is in Ada County, by the way. Ada County, a Republican prosecutor. So I went to that trial and watched it, and it was terrifying to think that, man, I don't know if I want to pull my gun in Ada County. Like, I don't know what's going to happen, especially someone like me that's, a political figure. So Kevin, we can't do that. We've got to have a way for gun owners or whoever is being charged with something where they feel they've acted in self-defense, to put the pressure back on the state to go, okay, where is your evidence? We want to expedite that process so you're not sitting in a jail cell for 6 months while they conjure up some, case against you.
Greg Pruett joining us from the Idaho Second Amendment Alliance, the Idaho Dispatch. So what has been the reaction? Because you've been having an online survey. What are people around the state and obviously around the country think of what's going on with the Caldwell Night Rodeo and the gun-free zone?
Yeah, I think that the reaction has been overwhelmingly anger towards an event in Idaho, especially a rodeo doing a gun-free zone. A lot of people are extremely frustrated with that. The only people opposed are typically liberals who are like, oh, you can't have your guns, oh, poor people, So you get some of those comments or whatever, but the vast majority of Idaho's gun owners are not happy with a gun-free zone, and it's twofold, right? They're mad that there's a gun-free zone at a rodeo in Idaho, but then they're also confused on why it was allowed to happen at a public venue, right? So that's the two things there. But we've had, excuse me, just massive amounts of people, signing the petition to oppose the gun-free zone in at the Caldwell Rodeo, and lots of comments and emails and all sorts of stuff. So they're very frustrated, I would say. And here's what, if I had to guess what the Caldwell Night Rodeo would probably say is the issue, they're probably going to say insurance costs. And right, it's going to be X amount of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars to allow firearms into the venue. That would be my guess is what they're going to blame it on. And interestingly, Kevin, this last session, guess what? We went in and we said, hey, we want to alleviate the pressure from the insurance companies. So why not give immunity to not only the city, okay, that's hosting the event or has the venue, I should say, and then also give immunity to the Caldwell Night Rodeo. Look, if somebody exercises their right improperly and hurts someone with a firearm, you charge them with a crime, and if you've done that, the person injured or their family or whatever can still sue. But you take away the pressure from the rodeos or whatever the event is, and you take away the pressure from the city or the county or the state or whatever, and give them immunity. That solves that problem. And then the insurance company has no reason to charge extra money. So and we tried to push that. Guess what, Kevin? As you know, ran into roadblocks. Oh, I don't know. We don't know about that. And you just, same old story, Kevin.
Indeed. Greg, can you hang on for a moment?
Yep.
All right. More coming up with our great friend Greg Pruett. Welcome back, Kevin Miller in the morning at KIDO Talk Radio, the travels and travels of the Republican Party. Our great friend Greg Pruett joining us here. Dylan wanted me to ask you a question. You've been getting smacked a lot on the X. I mean, he wanted to know your reaction to that.
Yeah, there's a couple people on X. I'm not going to name names right now, but yeah, there's a couple people on X that are hitting us or smacking us or whatever you want to say. And it's kind of funny. They, like last night, they were like, the ISA has never done anything to fight the NFA. And I laugh about that stuff. We were instrumental in encouraging Congressman Russ Fulcher to sign on to HR 335, which is Missouri Representative Eric Burleson's bill to literally repeal the entire NFA, to abolish it. And we've been working on that all year. We've been, sending out emails and encouraging, both of our, reps. I can't imagine Simpson's going to do it, but we've been doing this. We've been doing that all year. Writing about it and talking about it and pushing. And so it's a bunch of idiots that have no idea who we are. Clearly don't follow us or the work that we do. And I ignore that stuff because the gun owners who have followed us for a long time, they know who we are. They know the work we've done. So yeah, you just debunk the lies and focus. That's the thing, right, Kevin? When you deal with these narcissists and these liars, they want to get you sidetracked. They want to get you just in these stupid debates. And I don't have time for it. I'm too busy running this thing. And so I just stay focused on what I do.
And again, not to belabor the point, but on one hand, you're called an extremist, and now you're not conservative enough. The changing dynamics of Idaho politics, sir.
It is. It's getting really weird, to say the least.
Yeah.
The state house is fractured, and the conservative movement certainly has a big fracture in it right now. And I think it's going to take a couple of years for it to all level out, and we'll see, I guess, what it looks like in a couple of years.
Well, you bring up a great point, and let's shift gears to your hat with the Idaho Dispatch. There, we'll talk politics here. You have people that are fans of the Speaker of the House, people that are not fans of the Speaker of the House, and then you have outside groups. Again, for those of us that don't cover it as passionately as you do and have that political reporting experience, what's going on? You think Speaker Moyle's a lot better than Speaker Bedke, but many folks aren't happy with him.
Yeah, that's
folks.
A tough nut to. Yeah, that's a tough nut to crack, I guess, in a short amount of time. But I've always had a good relationship, I guess, with Speaker Moyle. I've never had any personal issues, and I think he's always been supportive of the gun issues. I don't know. I don't think he necessarily likes me, and which I don't really care. But I do think he is better than Bedke, certainly. But, I think a lot of the problem for a lot of folks is Mike Moyle has been in office, I believe, since the 90s. He's been in there a really long time. He's been in leadership the vast majority of that time. And so I think a lot of people just look at him and go, with his IFF scores, a lot of times he's gotten D's, F's, I think, and maybe some really low C's. And so they would see him, I don't think as a rhino, but definitely a very moderate Republican in comparison to, a lot of folks at the top of the IFF score chart, I guess. And so, but despite those scores and despite the, long time that he's been in there, some conservatives are saying, hey, he's not really much different than a lot of the other people that we've had. But then a lot of the really conservative lawmakers decided to support him in this the last election, and so that's where the rift is coming. And I guess I'm on the side of it's kind of an interesting dynamic, for someone that's been in there a long time and is not super conservative. Was there not a chance to get a more conservative speaker potentially? So that's kind of the interesting questions and dynamics there.
Right. It is an interesting vibe when you're talking about Speaker Moyle, and you take a look at his record versus the lieutenant governor's record, but you have a lot of, and again, Greg, you've covered politics here from the beginning. You've been an activist in politics. Did you ever think you'd see the day where conservatives would have equal footing? Because usually the people that had been in office for a while, they had access to the donors and the big money. And now what we've seen is outside groups coming in, playing in Idaho, which hadn't been the case, until the last few years.
Yeah, this last session, Kevin, we had the most, probably conservative legislature we've ever had. And the fracture is really unfortunate because, we could have, a couple dozen all pushing in the same direction. And I think voting wise, that stuck for the most part, that a lot of them still voted in the same direction, despite the fracture, right? I mean, Heather Scott is still, at the top, towards the top of the IFF scores, as is, Glenita Zeiderveld, and although she's in the Senate. And so I think for voting wise, they all kind of stuck, together. But, certainly the leadership fight is what really caused that. And I think they're, trying to force the legislature to move further to the right, as, Idaho Ed News and a number of other media outlets have criticized, said it was the worst legislative session ever. But yeah, it was an interesting session. One of the most interesting I think I've seen in quite a while.
Yeah, you could write several pages of articles on the battle for the speakership, and Mike Moyle's seat really broke that once united group up. Let's go back to Caldwell. A lot of people don't understand it. You have a history there as far as breaking big stories, especially when it comes to the police department.
Yeah, we were the ones that broke the FBI investigation a few years ago, and a number of other lawsuits and stories and stuff that have come out of there. It's been a really weird city. I've never seen anything like it in Idaho. And people like, oh, you just want to attack Caldwell. I'm like, no, but like every tip I get seems to be coming out of Caldwell. People from inside the government saying, hey, you need to look at this, you need to look at this. And so we just start investigating. I'm not getting that from other towns. And so we just end up with all these stories coming out of Caldwell, or maybe it's just Caldwell that's got some issues. I'm not really sure, but it's interesting with the rodeo now. There's a fight over the sheriff. Karen Donahue came out and kind of blasted the city because the city is charging, so the Caldwell Police Department is offering security, and they all get overtime pay for that, but they are charging the Caldwell Night Rodeo, thousands of dollars. I can't remember the exact amount off my head, but it's thousands of dollars in additional fees. And the sheriff was like, hey, wait a minute here. It's our job to go out and provide security regardless. We're law enforcement. That's what we do. That's our job. We shouldn't be charging extra. And that's kind of interesting because I wouldn't have expected to see that open criticism there from the sheriff, against the city. And so here we go again with Caldwell charging fees, and a lot of people very, very angry about that, and felt that the sheriff was right in this regard.
Well, again, there is a difference between church and state there, between the sheriff and the police department. We'll see how that plays out. Caldwell in general, and hopefully we're going to get Big Chuck to join us next hour on this, but you take a look at it's been a very bumpy run for the current mayor, who, was elected pretty popularly. He Caldwell native, has gone through a lot. I mean, you got the parking meters, you got the parking lot, you've got, my West Valley Humane Society, which I'm a board member of. A lot of attention seeking or attention grabbing stories in Caldwell.
Yeah. You also have the train story. They're going to, silence the trains. And I mean, like you said, excuse me, every week it seems to be something new. And I just don't know if the people, we're going to find out right in a couple months, because the mayor is up for re-election. He beat the recall. The recall did not even make it on the ballot. There's a lot of signatures, quite a few signatures. I was kind of impressed.
Hold on. Let me jump into that for a second. And then we had lawsuits over social media posts involving the recall stuff. So it's very active in litigation as well.
Yeah, there's lots of lawsuits with the police department and also against the mayor and the city, and a number of those are still ongoing. There's been some settlements for other ones, and oh my gosh, Kevin, like it just this is the opportunity, right? If you live in Caldwell and you want change, then November is going to be the time to do that. But as you know, Kevin, look, people care about the presidential election more than anything, which to some extent they really shouldn't. It's the local stuff that ends up killing you. And then they care about the gubernatorial and the congressional stuff after that. And then you get down to and then there's kind of a big drop to the state house. You know, you get to the primaries and the participation oftentimes in those primaries for the lawmakers every 2 years drops in stuff. And then you get to these dang local elections, the city elections, which, by the way, if you're a conservative, this is where all the liberals go to run for office because there's no party affiliation disclosed on the ballot. And so these liberals all go and run in these local elections. And so the participation is so low in these city elections. And so that's where, you know, yeah, there's a lot of angry people. There's a lot of controversy, but is it enough to get them off their butts and vote in November if they want change? And that's a big question. I'm not typically convinced that that's going to be the case because, again, people just don't want to vote in these local elections most of the time, which is where Evangeline Beechler was the former Idaho Democrat state chair, and she got caught on an open mic. I always say an open mic. She literally admitted, and she used the word hide. She goes, "We like these local elections because we can hide and, you know, and, oh, yeah, we don't have to put our affiliation on the ballot." They openly admit it, that that's what they're doing in Idaho. So start paying attention to your local elections. I guess that would be my advice.
Greg, we'd love to have you back because we want to talk about Nampa and the Idaho Center and controversy there, and another big election in Nampa as well. Idaho Second Amendment Alliance, Idaho Dispatch for all your news. Greg, it's funny. You're still a very young man, but again, I feel like you and I are like the old horses around here, having been involved in these politics and change for so many years, sir.
Oh yeah, man. I feel really, really old. Politics will age you quickly, and I assume political radio does the same. But yeah, we're like the old horses, I guess. Now I don't know. It's kind of weird.
Not dead horses. Greg Pruett, we appreciate you, sir.
All right, brother. Thanks. Take care.
Thank you. Big difference between old and dead horses.